Voice of San Diego podcasts are sponsored in part by a proud supporter of Monarch School and Make-A-Wish San Diego. As a nonprofit news organization, we depend on our members, foundations, and sponsors to provide funding to support the investigative journalism you expect from us. We are very grateful for all of our supporters, and we will recognize them during the show. Make-A-Wish San Diego grants wishes to children with critical illnesses in San Diego and Imperial counties. Visit sandiego.wish.org to find out how you can help make wishes come true. And Monarch School has served San Diego for nearly 3 decades, beginning as a one-room education center and expanding into a K-12 comprehensive school designed to educate homeless youth. To find out more or to get involved, visit monarchschools.org. If you like Voice of San Diego's work and want to become a sponsor too, contact us at development@voiceofsandiego.org.
My mom says my neighborhood school isn't good enough.
How am I supposed to know my kids are getting the best education possible?
Welcome to Good Schools for All, a podcast from the investigative news organization Voice of San Diego.
We cut through the jargon and polarized debate to get you the news and ideas that matter. Good schools are at the heart of our democracy and economy, and we're about good schools for all kids.
We hope you'll learn and maybe teach us something. Enjoy the show.
There should be an excellent school in every community.
Hello, I'm Scott Lewis.
And I'm Laura Cohn.
Hi, Laura.
Hey, Scott.
How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah?
Midsummer, maybe a little midsummer blues, but I'm headed to New York City shortly, so
Oh, yeah?
things are looking up.
What are you doing in New York?
Just playing.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I only have one play mode in the summertime.
Yeah. It has to do with the ocean?
Swimming pools. Well, I play myself in the ocean and the kids somewhat, but swimming pools.
Ah.
We go to every swimming pool we can. And that's the only thing I'm really good at as a dad is being in the swimming pool.
You throw them, Marco Polo.
Lots of throwing. We have a game called Snails on a Whale where they have to hold on.
Yeah.
There's a book, Snails on the Whale.
Snail on the Whale. That one, no.
And it's really the only thing that's my only contribution as a dad is that I can have good fun for 3 hours in a pool. We're all sunburned and wrinkled and it's good.
That's a good thing to be good at.
Yeah. Love pools though. And, I just kind of like scope for friends that have one or the Y in La Jolla or the Y, all the Ys. I got all the Ys down.
Yeah.
So, as the summertime goes on, we're getting more and more information about, various school districts. Obviously, it's not a time necessarily for in-class news, but there's a lot of news of governance. The other day, the San Diego Unified School District, for example, announced and decided to put on the ballot a new tax increase, a school bond. Now, these are construction bonds. So in California, just a little lesson here. In California, it's to get a special tax for a special need, like a stadium or something. It requires a 2/3 vote of the people. But to get a general tax just for general needs, it requires a 50% vote of the people. There is one exception, and those are school construction bonds, which require 55% of the vote.
For no particular reason.
Just a quirk.
Just
a quirk. Just like make it a little harder than just a simple majority.
Yeah.
So the school district could go and ask for a general tax increase for whatever it wants.
Yeah.
For just 50%. It could use that money for salaries, all kinds of stuff. But it has decided to go for this construction bond. This is a $3.5 billion bond, and it would be $60 per $100,000 of property value. So if your house is assessed, now that's not necessarily what it's worth. Like if you go on, one of those websites and it shows what your house is worth, if you were to try to sell it, that's not what it is. It's whatever the assessor values your house.
Right,
so
which can be considerably lower thanks to Prop 13.
Yeah, exactly. So if your house is valued at $400,000, then this would be a tax increase per year of $60 per 100, so $240.
Right.
Yes. And so $240, that's not nothing.
No.
So that has finally that's got its approval from the San Diego Unified School District. So on top of projects already listed in previous bonds, there are a few additions that signal the district wants, a stronger legal footing to pursue projects already in the works. Among them, swimming pools, new district administration center, stadium lights, all kinds of stuff. But they're also focusing heavily on security. They invoked the mass shootings in schools all over across the country. They want to do more difficult
Fences,
and entryways.
Mm-hmm.
And they also talked about plumbing, and we gave them a little grief because they had this cycle where they were talking about the lead issue. They said there was some lead in the Emerson Bandini school.
Yeah.
And we pointed out that they had promised in 3 previous state and local bond initiatives that they were going to take care of the plumbing at Emerson Bandini. They still haven't done that. And so they say that will happen next year. That's scheduled for next year, no matter what.
Regardless of whether this passes.
So just want to make sure that's clear. But yeah, they're focusing also on the lead issue. So they're going to really highlight lead and security, lead and water and security.
Okay, good.
Really hitting the chords with that. So, and they're also promising that this would be the bond that would make it possible for them to get to zero energy usage, just only using solar power and such.
Nice.
San Diego Unified also has passed a largely balanced budget, $1.33 billion operating budget for the next school year. But there's a budget deficit expected, $41 million next year and $35 million after that. If they don't close that next year, it'll all add up together, $76 million. So part of what we're talking about today
that is on the docket
is school district finances. So one of the questions I had last year when the San Diego Unified School District was dealing with a big budget deficit was, why is this happening, right?
Yep. It's mysterious. State tax revenues are shooting up through the roof, and school districts are seeing increasing revenues as well, and yet districts across our region are working on cuts.
Well, there was not only the revenues going, but there was also there were actual tax increases, right? The governor's tax increase on wealthy people, and that was renewed. And then there was all these construction bonds, and there was that new formula for distributing funds in the state that brought San Diego more revenue. And the
local control funding formula.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so there was a lot of questions about why in this moment are we seeing so many structural budget deficit problems. And so we did a story this week at San Dieguito High School District. That's
my kid's district.
They last month agreed to plug a deficit over the next 3 years by digging deeper into reserves. They're going to deplete their reserves. Board President Beth Hergesheimer, told Voice San Diego that increased retirement contributions mandated by the state put the budget under pressure. And that's the theme all around. So what we're seeing... Yeah,
she didn't mention that we pay our teachers the highest in the region.
And they added a bunch, too. Although increased staffing... She said, may have hurt our bottom line. It was the right thing to do. And this gets to one of the things I wanted to articulate, is it feels like, so first of all, there's a lot going on with retirement. And we're going to talk about that. We have on our show, you and Ashley McGlone interviewed Jason Willis and Kelsey Krausen. They're from West Ed. They did a paper, quote, "The Silent Recession, Why California School Districts Are Underwater."
Mm-hmm.
And so that's coming up in the show. But yeah, I mean, these pressures, the pensions in particular, and the changing assumptions there, and how big the bills are coming to the school districts. That's what the school district pointed to, first of all, when it said why it was having trouble with San Diego Unified last year. And across the board, that's the case.
Yeah. It's the state recognized that they had too low contributions to the pension fund and too low growth during the recession. And so immediately following the decision to put the local control funding formula in place and the pledge that was part of that to accomplish returning the revenues to the school districts back to 2008 levels. But then the next year they announced these increased pension obligations by districts that are just really killing. It's the biggest factor that's really hurting districts revenue-wise or budget-wise.
Mm-hmm. So what I was kind of getting at is, like she says there, it's the right thing to do to increase staffing no matter what it does to our bottom line. I think that's like really illustrative of what is at play here, which is basically that there are no incentives to not push things as far as possible. And that the real art of school district financing and funding and budgeting is to get it as far as possible to where you're not quite insolvent. And like it's there's no incentive except for like you might get praised on the Good Schools for All podcast or something. Like there's no real incentive to like have us really perfectly balanced budget and nice reserves and all that stuff, because you have the real incentives, the real pressure is going to be on paying folks more, or on the teachers and the other classified employees and such, making them happy and then making parents happy is going to override some wonks validation for you 10 times over, right?
Sure. I mean, they can't run in the red continuously. There's no magical money out there. They can't print money. So, I mean, that's really, the enforcement comes from San Diego County Office of Education reviewing their budgets. But yeah, you're right. The districts, they operate with insufficient information because they have to do their budgeting right when the state is finalizing its budget. Yeah. So they do their budgeting based on some magical thinking, and they just hope that the state comes through with enough revenues to kind of make everything work out in a reasonable enough way that they can continue until the next year. But I guess what we're sharing with our listeners is it's really coming home to roost, and I don't mean in sort of like a revenge way, but just that the districts are actually having to make cuts now. So at this moment when parents like us should be seeing class sizes coming down and more opportunities for our kids, or more supports for kids who are struggling, the opposite is what we're experiencing, and it's really disappointing.
Right. So if you're at your school and you're wondering why there's more fundraising, please, or there's fewer resources at the school, or libraries are getting closed, or programs are getting shut down,
or you see special ed kids who you think should be getting more support, should be having an aide in the classroom, keeping the teacher company,
more occupational therapy programs,
yep,
or more speech programs, or
yep,
all of these things are right on the bubble of things that get cut back, music programs, other things. And so if you're wondering why that's happening at a time of economic growth, of taxes that were increased, of construction taxes that were increased, all that stuff, well, this is how that works. This is our show about that. And again, we've brought in Ashley McGlone, who reports on that stuff for us, and Jason Willis and Kelsey Krausen from the West Ed, whose paper we're reviewing. And let's hear what they have to say.
Okay, great. We are joined in the Great Voice of San Diego podcast studio by phone by two experts in school district budgets in California. And I'm also joined by Ashley McGlone, who is an incredible reporter working on a lot of issues related to school districts, including their budgets. So Ashley is going to help me with the interview while Scott is vacationing. So our guests are Jason Willis from West Ed, which is an education research outfit here in California. He's the director of strategy and performance. And also Kelsey Krausen, who's a research associate at West Ed. And you all published a report in April that caught our eye that really broke down why it is that revenues are really escalating for school districts in California. And yet we see many districts in our region struggling with their budgets. It's called silent recession. Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to do the report and why you called it silent recession?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, particularly in thinking about some of the struggles that K-12 school districts in California have had over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think primarily the title is derived from this idea that though the general public, perceives that K-12 school districts are doing well, that they've had large investments over the last 4 or 5 years, which they have, they continue to struggle with some real and practical issues in ensuring that they can provide a high quality education to all of their students. And so the report really reflects a lot of these deeper investigations that allow us to unpack some more of what I would describe as the kind of technical details of school district budgets as a means to really kind of broaden this issue to a more general public and make others aware of some of these challenges that school districts are facing while trying to serve the students in their community.
Yeah, they're incredible fiscal pressures that they're facing. Even for me, I know quite a lot about budgets, partly from Ashley's reporting, but you really dug into some of them, and it's incredible. So let's start with the pension pressure. Walk us through a little bit what's going on with districts' requirements to contribute to pensions and where that's headed.
Yeah, so the public pension system in California affects a vast number of public employees, not just in public education, but when you think about other public services in your community, like firefighters and police officers and other public employees that work for the city, county, and state government, all are affected by the two big programs in California that offer public pensions. Specifically, one of the challenges that school districts are facing, equal to some of these other public entities, is this challenge of increasing costs that are associated with the pension program itself. And so when the public pension program is estimating, for example, the amount of money that they would get from investment returns, when they're looking at the longevity of individuals that would be paid from the pension program, and the cost associated with that, what we've seen in California over, really over the last dozen years or so is a growing cost that would need to be borne by the public entities that represent those individuals. And school districts are not immune to that. There was some reform that California did on the public pension program several years ago that put in place, both for teachers and other professionals in our school systems, escalating rates of contribution on behalf of those employees by the school districts to the program itself. And so the direct impact that has on school districts is as they are considering where they need to make their investments, both in people and programs for kids, they often are coming up with some limited sets of choices because pensions in particular, as costs have risen, are a requirement, a mandate, if you will, from these programs to pay into those funds as a means to support those that have put in their time working for public entities over the previous decades. So
just so people listening understand, your paper lays out the escalation rate for the contribution. So starting in 13-14 for the CalSTRS, the teacher retirement system, the contribution rate was 8.3%, and this past school year it was already up to 14.4%. Next year it'll be 16.3%, and then in 2020-21 it'll be 19%. So, more than 2.5 times where it started. That's an incredible draw on district funds.
Yeah, that's right, and it has created this pressure. As we describe it within the paper, that for senior leaders within school districts, the superintendent, the chief business officer, principals in the schools, the board of education, that it really brings to bear some really hard questions about where they need to make those investment of resources. And as a public entity serving the kids within these communities, those decisions can be exceedingly difficult and hard. And while the state of California has made significant strides over the last 4 or 5 years to make investments in K-12 education, it seems, along with both pension and some of the other cost pressures that we describe in the research, it's making it more and more difficult for school districts to continue to stay focused on investments that will enhance the education of kids on a day-to-day basis.
Where do the pensions fall? It looks like you guys zeroed in on 6 different fiscal challenges, kind of in broad view. Are pensions the number one if you had to put a number one on it, or is one of the other items you guys identified causing even more stress across the board?
I would say in our investigation that when we looked across our sample of districts, and given the work that WestEd does with other school districts throughout the state of California, that it certainly was one of the key contributors to some of the fiscal pressures that school districts are experiencing. I think some of the other challenges that we mentioned in the research around issues of special education and aging facilities are also pretty large contributors.
So why don't we switch over to special education now? What's going on with that?
What we've seen in California over the last 5 to 10 years is increasing enrollment of students in special education programs. For example, we've seen that the number of students that are enrolled in special education programs over the last 5 years has grown from 679,000 to approximately 754,000, while the overall kind of K-12 enrollment in the state has decreased slightly. So what that means is that there's a couple of factors there. I think the first is that we've actually gotten better as a profession at identifying the needs of students that particularly have, behavioral, academic, or other challenges that would qualify them for special education programs, which is a positive, that we're getting them the right kinds of very specific services that allow them to benefit and prosper in our K-12 system. But what that does, that also does, is that it will put increasing pressure on the overall system itself. We know for a fact that the costs associated generally with educating students that are in special education programs is generally higher, and there's a pretty broad span to that. And so as you have the proportion of the population that's growing in these programs, the costs associated with them also grow. And that we've seen this kind of trend in California over the last 5 years. And this is what we would describe as another kind of mandate for school districts. The special education program in school districts is well protected by federal and state law, as well as a lot of case law that really kind of protect the needs and rights of these students, rightfully so. But again, from the perspective of thinking about how do you manage the school district, how do you manage it to provide a quality education for all the kids that they serve, this is a fiscal pressure that many school districts across the state of California have been experiencing. And they've gotten increases through LCFF and, some of the priorities associated with that. But special education hasn't gotten a lot of attention, I'd say, until, some of the more recent California state budgets that we've passed in the last year or two.
So, Jason, you've been talking about how the population of special education students in California has risen over the last 10 years at the same time as the state overall student enrollment has declined. And that's putting fiscal pressures on school districts. Have you seen a lot of districts turning towards, since they don't have enough dedicated funding for special education, leaning on their unrestricted funds to kind of fill that gap? And are they now trying to kind of pull that money back towards other needs as these other fiscal pressures weigh in? Or are you seeing a pattern across the board?
Yeah, this is, as I was mentioning before, one of the kind of mandated expenditures within school districts' budgets is around their special education program. So the school district has a federal and state obligation to ensure that they fund those programs for the students as they're agreed to with the parents or the guardian that oversees the student themselves. And that's again kind of well protected in federal and state law. And so often school districts will make contributions from their unrestricted general fund, what we now refer to as the base program, through LCFF in California to cover the remaining set of costs for special education. And, hats off to many of the school districts in California and many in San Diego County that have really looked to various ways in which to try and stem the costs associated with those programs by trying to intervene with students earlier to kind of prevent them from needing to get into special education programs, really kind of strengthening a lot of the early reading and math programs and the social emotional behavioral programs in the general education program as a means to cut back on the necessary investment for those kids that would necessarily go into special ed programs. And it's been an ongoing challenge. I mean, one of the things that we can observe across the state of California, as I was mentioning earlier about, getting better at identifying certain populations, is that we've seen the autism population increase by nearly 2.5 times in the state of California, from a little less than 40,000 to now over 100,000 over the last 10 years. And this has been a great kind of benefit for those students that need those services. But, when you think about that kind of investment lined up with a lot of other demands for school districts, it makes for some very difficult and tough conversations that communities have to have about where they're investing, a limited set of resources.
Okay, so we've talked about two of the big drivers of this silent recession. Can you talk about aging facilities, the other one that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, so this is one of those I would probably describe as more obscure elements of a school district's budget, but this really kind of accounts for the ongoing operations and maintenance of school district facilities. And so many communities are probably familiar with bond programs that school districts will ask taxpayers to invest in, which include expenditures to cover kind of new buildings or significant renovations on aging facilities. And those bond programs, have been successful throughout the state of California in helping to create an environment for students that is welcoming and safe and really conducive to learning on a day-to-day basis.
But not really everywhere, because not all districts have bond programs going. What do we know? What percent of districts have operating bonds, facilities bonds in operation?
We don't have that information for the state of California or for San Diego County. And you're right, not all school districts will have bond programs, and that's really based on the kind of needs of that local community and how they think about their facilities relative to the resources that they have available. And one of the effects that we've seen as a result of the Great Recession is that school districts are making some really hard choices around investing in core programs versus other necessary needs. Clearly the maintenance and operation of the buildings is a need, but when it comes to thinking about a limited set of resources, school districts would, often deprioritize that that need in a means to ensure that there were, high quality, competent teachers in the classroom, ensuring that, there were other professional staff that could be there to support students in the middle of the Great Recession. And so over a period of time, what that does is it creates this backlog of needs around maintaining, facilities and the operation of those facilities. And so what we've seen in the state of California is that, as a result of that, as we've seen in other areas, this kind of need to kind of make these investments in the near future as a means to continue to maintain some of those facilities. And as you point out, some communities have vastly different needs than others based on, their prior investments.
Yeah, vastly different needs, but also vastly different willingness of voters to approve capital bonds.
Even when a community is willing to put forth, the approval needed for a bond, it's then on the district to prioritize the types of projects that would fix the infrastructure to help correct some of the aging facility pressures that they're facing. I know locally, some projects for San Diego Unified, they're going for their third multi-billion-dollar bond this year. It looks like that'll be finalized possibly in July. But some of the same, plumbing replacements that have been was on a bond in 2008, was on a bond in 2012. It's going to be on the 2018 bond again for the same school. It's still on the old list. They just haven't gotten to it. They've prioritized other projects first. So, and I think you guys talk about that too. I mean, there's the outside external pressures, but then there is some local accountability and decision making that can make an impact on these sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, they absolutely can. I think one of the great benefits that came along with the control funding formulas, it really it reset the benchmark, if you will, for the ways that school districts are engaging their community around both their resource investments and how those resources are aligned to their priorities.
Well, yeah, we'll get to solutions in a second. I do want to give you a chance to tick through the other three quickly, maybe tick through the other three big factors that you identified in your silent recession paper.
Yeah, so a couple of other things that we saw in our review, were really around matters of healthcare costs, which are also considered a benefit, and we've seen this national debate over the last 5 to 10 years as well, with some solutions being put in place and then rolled back. We've also observed this matter of a teacher shortage that we've seen kind of growing across the state of California, and I think a lot of this has to do with actually being able to afford to live in the great state of California. Unfortunately, the rate of pay that many of our teachers and administrators in our public schools receive do not compete favorably with other types of positions that graduates coming out of their bachelor's or out of their master's could receive. And so what we've seen as a result of the economy coming back, it's been great for kind of, continued investment in public services. But what it's also meant is that potential prospects to be teachers in the classroom, principals for our schools, central office administrators, superintendents, is that they have other opportunities that they could potentially take advantage of. And what we've seen is that many of those individuals are choosing those other paths. And so what this has done is created difficulty for many local school districts to secure people into positions that they need to support kids in their learning. And, finally, we see, this matter, this isn't applicable to all districts in California, but certainly for, places like San Diego Unified and similar types of communities across the state of California is a declining enrollment. And the way that school districts in the state of California earn the vast majority of their dollars, what they account for as revenue, is through the enrollment of kids. So when students are not showing up in those school districts year over year, the school district has to necessarily plan for those reductions in revenue and then make subsequent reductions in their expenditures to ensure that their budgets are balanced on a year-to-year basis.
On that point, I think, you hear, okay, there's declining enrollment. So school districts maybe need less staff to supervise those students. But you guys identified a few sort of barriers or obstacles that maybe makes them less nimble and able to kind of directly respond in that manner that would cut costs sort of to equate with the lost revenue. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true. I think when a lot of the kind of policy and regulation was written for California school districts, it was written with, a very stable environment in mind, meaning that communities would continue to educate roughly the same population of students that they were established to serve, and that, there would be a longer period of time upon which school districts could adjust to changing circumstances and environments. It could be the enrollment of kids, it could be other changes in the costs associated with running the school district. And what we can see over the last particularly decade or so is that there are other circumstances that are significantly changing the circumstances for districts more quickly, which makes it tough for them to adjust on a year-to-year basis as a means to ensure that their expenditures are in line with their revenues. Once the school year starts, once you lock in, the positions that you want to have in the school system, it's very difficult to make those reductions in the middle of the year as a means to adjust your expenditures to your revenues.
I think you guys also mentioned, the student losses might not be tidy. So you might not lose, 30 third grade students. You might lose 5 third grade students and 5 fourth grade students. And so you might not be able to make a 1-to-1, one teacher cut per every 30 kids lost. And that's a practical kind of obstacle that they face.
I think the other thing to note too is that when you're thinking about declining enrollment within school districts, the cost associated with that per pupil amount, like the amount of money that arrives per student, some of the vast majority of that is associated with the teacher in the classroom and the school-based services, somewhere to the tune of 70 and 80 and even 90%. But the other proportion of those funds are really associated with the infrastructure of the school district. What it costs to maintain the school building itself, what it costs to maintain, the electricity and the water and the kind of ongoing operations, the things you don't often see or think about, when a parent walks into a school. And it's not as easy, to think about how to adjust for those other factors, if a school district is going through some pretty rapid declines in their enrollment.
Okay, I want to try something here. I'm going to run by you some approaches that we see local districts using to balance their budgets, and have you comment on whether these approaches are a good idea, a bad idea, or something in between. Okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So here's one: early retirements for teachers.
It's actually a pretty popular mechanism that school districts across California have used as a means to create an incentive for those that are really close to retirement to moving out. And the effect, and this is pretty well publicly documented, is what it does is overall would reduce the cost associated with payroll for the number of positions that they have open.
Right, because you refill the positions with less expensive teachers.
That's right. Yeah. So that basically you would be recruiting in teachers that have, 3, 4, 5 years of experience as opposed to those that are retiring out of the system that may have put 20, 25, or 30 years in.
All right. Here's another one: selling property.
Selling property, like assets from the school district?
Right.
Yeah. So again, this is a one-time kind of revenue generating opportunity for the school district. And I think when you think about city or kind of community planning and development, this actually can be like a real asset to the community potentially. Particularly if a school district owns a piece of property that they're just not using, or they don't see any reasonably future need for that property. It can generate some one-time funds that can help to do a variety of things. Like number one, it could help to bolster the school district's reserve, or what you may consider their savings account, in case they run into some other fiscal pressures down the line. It can also help to deal with other kind of one-time liabilities. For example, we were talking about aging facilities, and so they could take the proceeds from that sale and invest it back into the maintenance and operation for other facilities across the system. And if the school district is thinking about those issues, thoroughly, that might actually really help to think about consolidation of some of its schools as a means to really maximize the limited resources they have access to.
For sure, although that's super hard to do. Communities hate that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's another one. Stop approving charters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is probably one of the kind of hotter, more controversial issues in California, and thinking about introducing other types of educational options for students in various communities. And while this does have impacts on the kind of financial pressures of the school system, I think that's really a kind of a choice for the community. And if the school district is thinking that through, along with those that are actually proposing the charters themselves, that coming to a common vision, I think first and foremost for the kinds of educational opportunities that community wants for its kids. I mean, that seems to be more of the guiding principle that we've seen with districts across the state, rather than necessarily being motivated financially by that kind of a policy option.
Yeah, maybe it has been in the past, but we have districts here locally who are being very explicit about wanting to, and also actually see it in the governor's race about putting a halt on charters because of the financial pressures that they put on school districts.
Yeah, and I think that, this is probably one of a myriad of policies that probably should be reviewed or thought about relative to the ability of a school district to be able to respond to those kinds of environments. We were talking earlier about some of the various policy and regulations that really hamstring school districts as a means to be able to adjust more rapidly to the environment. I certainly think, that the matter and policy surrounding charters, both their operation and the facilities that are available to them, is one area, in addition to a host of other issues as well. And so we would really encourage, the state or school districts to take a very holistic approach in thinking about the ways in which school systems are operating and what are the regulations or policies that actually enable them to respond effectively to the changing environment around them.
We see our local districts in the face of fiscal pressures making a pledge to take all the cuts at the central office and shielding the schools from the cuts. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that when I served as a school district administrator, one of the things that I often talked about with my staff and with the schools that we worked on behalf of is that the only reason we exist is because the schools exist. So I think first and foremost, central office departments, need to take the approach and the mentality that, their work is really doing that on behalf of the schools. And I would say that there are real limits to applying, an across-the-board cut with the central office, or depending on the size of the necessary budget reductions, that the central office itself would bear the entire burden of those reductions. In particular, because central office costs really only make up a fraction of the expenditures associated with school district budgets. I think our analysis would suggest that, the school level personnel and compensation associated with the staff can consume anywhere between 70 to 85% of the entire district's budget. And so depending on the size of the cut, it's really going to make, it may not make as big a difference as what would be intended. And you could really potentially compromise a lot of the internal controls that are set up to really help maintain the operation of the school district. One basic example of this is your payroll department. The staff that sit in those departments that do incredible work to ensure accuracy and the efficiency of paying employees on a month-to-month basis, depending on the way the cut is instituted in the central office, can potentially compromise that integrity. And that can create a lot of other challenges for a school district that can be very unwelcome, if you will, as opposed to thinking about more balanced level reductions in spending.
Among the fiscal pressures you guys outlined and identified here, any anticipation that any of them are going away anytime soon? And if not, have you guys seen or identified successful strategies that have been implemented by schools that maybe aren't in the deficit spending pattern that you've seen in a lot of other districts for the next few years?
Yeah, Kelsey, do you want to take that one to start?
Sure. I would say we don't foresee any of these cost pressures going away anytime soon, but we are writing a second paper, which should be coming out in the next few months, that deals solely on the types of budget strategies that business officers are employing to try to navigate through this difficult period. So we're really excited to share some of that, what we've learned from district leaders and how they're making these difficult trade-offs.
Can you give us a couple examples?
Some of them are some of the most promising ones. Because staffing is such a important part of and large part of district budget. So there were several strategies related to really closely monitoring staffing ratios, ensuring that those that staff are in the places that are making the most difference for students. And along those lines, I think a lot of the strategies that districts are talking about relate to really using a strong evidence base and data to measure where their investments are having the greatest return for students, and making that information available to the public and other stakeholders at school sites in order to make informed decisions about how to prioritize their investments.
That sounds smart.
Is that hard though, right? Because we're talking dollars and cents, trying to be responsible with the dollars and cents that they have and making sure you aren't deficit spending. But if we're talking outcomes, we might be looking at things that aren't dollars and cents, right? And kind of, I think there was a point in your paper you talked about kind of breaking down that barrier wall between the budget offices and other offices to look at maybe that meaningful data to make those tough budget decisions.
Exactly. What we're seeing is we are seeing that more. I think some of this is driven just by the local control and accountability plan, the LCAP, and the fact that districts are now outlining their goals for student achievement and describing how they'll invest their dollars in order to improve outcomes and then monitoring those outcomes. So it has helped to prompt, I think, among other factors, these stronger partnerships and communication between the educational services and financial services offices.
Well, Jason, Willis, and Kelsey Krausen, thank you so much for joining us. I think it can be really confusing for the public about seeing the economic health going up and the revenues to school districts shooting up, and still to have their local school districts and schools making cuts. So that increased communication you described is super important, and also the research you did is helping all of us. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.